Hey y'all, it's Hannah and welcome back to the Cowgirl Museum Story Time. Today we're actually going to be reading a book written by one of our Cowgirl honorees, Sandra Day O'Connor. You may know her as the first female Supreme Court Justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, but you may not know that she actually grew up on a ranch. We're going to be reading about her childhood today and her really wanting a pet for her on her ranch. So again, it's written by Sandra Day O'Connor, and it's illustrated by Tom Port, and it's called Finding Susie. Sandra's summer began on a hot day beneath the pure, deep blue desert sky. She finished rereading her favorite book, and when she looked off into the distance, heat waves sparkled like ripples on a lake. Sandra loved living on the ranch, but now that the school was over, she would miss having the other children to play with. I wonder if this will be the year Mother and Dad will let me have a pet, she asked. Mother always says she will not allow an animal in the house, and Dad says I can just ride my horse. But it would be so nice to have a little pet to hold, to talk to, and to take care of. A week later, Sandra was driving in the truck with her father. Do you see what I see? He asked. A desert tortoise was walking slowly near the ranch road. When Sandra got out of the truck and approached him, the tortoise pulled his head and legs inside his shell. Sandra picked him up and turned him upside down. With his head and legs tucked inside, the tortoise was about the size of a dinner plate. Daddy, can I take the tortoise home? Please, Daddy? All right, if you promise to take good care of him, said her father. I will, said Sandra. Sandra put the tortoise in the front yard at the ranch house. There was grass and a low wall and a gate, so the tortoise could not get out. Sandra put out a bowl of water and some lettuce and other raw vegetables. The tortoise looked strong in his hard shell, so she named him Hercules. Hercules stayed in the yard for several weeks, eating the food Sandra picked out and walking slowly around the grassy area. Sandra picked Hercules up and tried to talk to him, but he always put his head and legs into his shell. Sandra brought Hercules into the kitchen a number of times. He learned to follow her to the refrigerator, where the lettuce and other vegetables were kept, in hopes of receiving more food. But Sandra was sorry that Hercules never seemed happy to see her. How old do you think Hercules is, Daddy? Oh, it's hard to say. Desert tortoises can live up to 100 years. In the winter, they dig deep tunnels and hibernate, said her father. What do you mean hibernate? Said Sandra. They go to sleep for a few months. They don't eat, but they are able to stay alive in that condition until the weather warms up, and there are green leaves to eat. We used to see a lot more of them. I think they're beginning to disappear. It would be too bad if there were no more tortoises, said Sandra. Do you think we should take Hercules back to the place where we found him? Yes, we should probably do that before the summer ends. A few days later, her father drove Sandra and Hercules to the road where they had found him. Sandra carefully carried Hercules to a place where she could gently put him down. She put a few raw vegetables near him and said, Be well, Hercules. Live a long time. Sandra knew she still wanted a pet. Later that summer, she found a very small cottontail rabbit nestled into the bushes near the windmill. The little rabbit was no bigger than her father's hand. Sandra picked up and brought her to the house. The rabbit was trembling and afraid. Her little tail was round and white and looked like a ball of cotton. Sandra showed the rabbit to her parents and said she wanted to keep her as a pet. Her mother sighed. I suppose you can try, but you may not let it loose in the house. Sandra named the rabbit Daisy. Her father helped her build a wire cage with a small gate she could use to reach inside and pick up the rabbit. She fed Daisy lettuce, broccoli, celery leaves, spinach, carrots, and some milk and water. The little rabbit ate most things Sandra gave her and grew a little larger, but Daisy did not like to be petted or held. She always seemed afraid. After a few weeks, Sandra's father said, Wild rabbits usually prefer to live outside with other rabbits. Why don't you let Daisy go back to where she came from so she can be with other rabbits? Please, Daddy, Daisy might be happier in a few weeks. Let's keep her a little while longer, Sandra said. But finally, Sandra decided that her father was right. She went to the cage and picked up Daisy and held her. Daisy, be good. I'm going to take you home with your rabbit family. I will miss you, though. Then Sandra carried Daisy back to the bushes near the windmill and put her down. Daisy hopped away without even a backwards look. One scorching hot day, Claude, one of the cowboys, told Sandra and her father that he had seen a young coyote caught in a trap in the pasture a couple miles away. Sandra and her father drove to the area Claude had described to try to find the coyote. There on the hill, near some sagebrush, they saw a small coyote struggling to free himself from the metal trap. One of its legs was badly hurt from the trap that had closed on it. Sandra's father wrapped the coyote in the empty feed sack to hold him quiet long enough to release the trap. Then he held the coyote tightly as he carefully drove back to the ranch house. I don't know who set that trap, Sandra's father exclaimed. No one is allowed to trap coyotes on this property. Can we keep him, Daddy? I will take care of him and help him get well, Sandra said. We'll see, said her father. Coyotes are very smart. I know he looks like a young pup, but they never get used to living with people like a dog does. I think you'll find it difficult to keep him. Oh, please, let me try, she said. Okay, you can try. Or at least until his leg gets better, said her dad. When they got home, Sandra put some ointment on the coyote's injured leg and placed him in the cage she had used for Daisy. She gave him bowls of milk and water, along with some berries and fresh hamburger meat. Sandra had read that coyotes eat many things, not just meat. The little coyote was very restless and continuously paced in his cage. He did not want to be touched or petted. Sandra named the coyote Slim Pickens. Claude looked at Slim and said, Sandra, don't you know that coyotes aren't good for nothing but killing rabbits and baby cows and making noise at night? Still, Sandra tried hard to get Slim to sit down and to let her pet him, but although his leg healed, he did not want to be near a human being. Sandra had often heard coyotes howling in the night. She knew that one coyote could sound like 2 or 3 with its different voices, but Slim never howled when he was in the cage. Finally, Sandra told her father that she thought Slim would be better off if he could return to the desert. When they let him out near where they first found him, Slim ran quietly away, never once looking back. Sandra felt very sad that the coyote did not want to be her friend. A few days later, Sandra's father was out riding on his horse in a high and rough part of the ranch. He found a baby bobcat, mewing and looking hungry and lost. He looked around and could not find the mother. Finally, he picked up the bobcat kitten and put him in his jacket pocket. Back at the ranch house that evening, Sandra watched him pull the baby bobcat out of his pocket. Sandra's father got some milk and warmed it in a pan on the stove. Then he let Sandra hold the kitten and feed him, using an eyedropper to put the milk in his mouth. The kitten was very hungry and took almost half a cup of the milk. Sandra helped find a cardboard box for him and made a bed in it out of old rags. I thought this little cat would die if I did not take him home, said her father, and I thought you might like to see him. I'm so glad, said Sandra. I'll help take care of him. And she did. She fed him with the eyedropper. She held the little bobcat and rubbed his fur. She named the kitten Bob. In a few months, Bob grew bigger and stronger. She took him to the bunkhouse to show Claude. Sandra, what are you doing with that bobcat? He'll just get big and try to eat you, he said. Them things is mean. Oh, no, Claude. I'll teach Bob to be nice. You'll see, said Sandra. And she did. Bob was friendly. He loved to be fed, petted, and scratched by Sandra. She got a ball of yarn, and Bob chased it and played with it. Bob even purred like an ordinary house cat, and when he was happy. But soon, Bob did not look like an ordinary house cat. He was much larger with rough fur, sharp pointed ears, and a very short stub of a tail. One day, Sandra asked her mother for some fresh meat to feed Bob. She cut it into little pieces and put it in a dish for him. Bob sniffed it and circled it, then he arched his back and growled. When Sandra picked up a piece of the meat and held it out to Bob, he scratched her hand with his claws as he grabbed the meat. Ouch! She cried. You hurt me, Bob. Meat soon became Bob's favorite food, but Sandra never again tried to get close to him when fresh meat was around. After 2 years, Bob was fully grown, about the size of a Cocker Spaniel, but then one night he just disappeared. Sandra looked everywhere for Bob, down by the water tank, at the windmill, and around the barn. She called his name. "Daddy, can we get out our horses and go look for Bob?" Sandra asked. Her dad shook his head. "I don't think we should find Bob, Sandra. He probably found another bobcat and went off to make his home away from people. Bob will be happier out on the mountains somewhere than with us. Maybe he will even have a family of his own." "Well, I just miss him so much," said Sandra. "He was my friend. He kept me company and I liked him. I know he growled and scratched, but that was only once. I just hope he comes back." The following week, Sandra and her parents drove to town to buy groceries and pick up their mail at the post office. Mr. White, the owner of the grocery store, was standing behind the counter. "Howdy, Sandra," he said. "How are you? Say, I have something to show you." He walked outside to his house, which was behind the store. There in the little garden by his house was a small white dog with a curly tail. "Hello, Susie," said Mr. White. "I brought someone to see you." Sandra knelt down, and Susie came up and sniffed her and wagged her tail. Sandra gently touched Susie's back. "If you want to take Susie home," Mr. White said, "it will be all right. She just showed up here a few days ago, and we don't know who owns her. No one has claimed her." "I'll ask my parents," said Sandra. But Sandra's parents were not so sure. "I don't know, Sandra. You haven't had much luck with your pets so far," said her mother. Sandra's father said, "Let's see if Susie likes your company." Susie did like Sandra's company, and Sandra loved hers. Together they explored the barns and the corrals. They went to see Claude in the bunkhouse. Susie even went to the door of the house and barked as if to say, "I'm here, let me in." Sandra fed Susie and made a bed for her on the back porch. The little dog followed Sandra wherever she went. Susie was also friendly with Sandra's parents and all of the cowboys. In fact, sometimes Susie smiled. After she smiled at Sandra's mother, she was even allowed to come inside the house. "You know," Sandra said, "I think a dog is about the best pet I could have. Susie, I love you." Susie just wagged her tail and smiled right back at her best friend. Thanks for joining me so much today on our Cowgirls Story Time. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give us a like and share with your friends, and I hope to see you all again soon.